Tonight, this disaster was not an accident. The final report from the infected blood inquiry finds a catalogue of systemic failures on a horrifying scale, accusing the government and the NHS of deliberately hiding the truth.
We were vindicated today. The problem with that vindication is it's 41 years too late.
The Prime Minister has apologised and called it a day of shame. Also making the headlines, a cost of business crisis. Kate Forbes announces £5 million for Scotland's start-ups.
Calls for Glasgow to have better planning ahead of football fan gatherings following disruption at the weekend.
As it's confirmed, Aaron Hickey will miss the Euros. The Scotland assistant boss says they can cope with injuries. I'm Vanessa Kennedy in Edinburgh.
And I'm John Mackay in Glasgow. This is the STV News at 6. Good evening. Thousands of people had their lives destroyed after receiving infected blood in a treatment disaster that has been described as no accident. The Infected Blood Inquiry's final report documents a catalogue of failures which had catastrophic consequences for patients and their families.
Around 3,000 people in Scotland were infected with HIV and hepatitis C from 1970 to 1991 through contaminated NHS blood products. Sir Brian Langstaff's report accuses successive governments and the NHS of repeatedly failing patients and trying to cover up what happened. The Prime Minister has issued an apology and said it's a day of shame. Here's our chief reporter, Sharon Frew.
Outside, they applauded as the final report was made public. For 5 years, campaigners have travelled from Scotland to attend the inquiry. One said today felt different, like a pilgrimage to the truth.
Stuff that we were called conspiracy theorists for saying, that we were besmirching medics' reputations. We were vindicated today. The problem with that vindication is it's 41 years too late.
A standing ovation greeted the inquiry's chair before he laid bare decades of gross and culpable failures.
There was no accident. People put their trust in doctors and the government to keep them safe, and that trust was betrayed. And then the government compounded the agony by telling them that nothing wrong had been done.
Many became infected in the 1970s and 80s after receiving contaminated blood through transfusions, others through treatment for haemophilia. Most of those patients received injections of a clotting agent called Factor VIII, made from blood sourced from Scottish donors and imported from the United States. The inquiry found as doctors here became aware of the HIV risks of Factor VIII, they embarked on a process of discovery rather than treatment, opting to carry out research. The so-called Edinburgh cohort, infected by a single batch of Factor VIII, was amongst the most studied group in the world. The report concluded those under the care of Professor Ludlam at Edinburgh Royal Infirmary were initially kept in the dark.
The toxicity, the betrayal that people have felt, and the knowledge that they were lied to.
Art has helped this daughter deal with her grief. Julia Gordon-Smith has committed to canvas her last contact with her dad, Peter. Julia says his trust in the Edinburgh consultants who treated his haemophilia was shattered after a diagnosis of hepatitis C. Peter died with liver cancer in 2018.
Very frightened. He couldn't talk to people about it, so he retreated. People were so isolated and they were kept apart from each other. It was deliberate to not allow victims to know that they weren't alone, that there was thousands and thousands of other people suffering the same thing. And they went out of their way to conceal the evidence.
The findings were also critical of decisions made at Glasgow's York Hill Hospital that led to children with haemophilia receiving blood products sourced from the United States. 21 youngsters became infected with HIV, including John McDougall's son Ewan, who died from AIDS aged 16.
The report talks about the utter unacceptability of the treatment of patients in York Hill, the utter unacceptability. It can't get much worse than that, really. It's hard to imagine a description that's more damning.
Scotland didn't need to rely on imported supplies from the United States. This Edinburgh facility processed Scottish donations. It was also supposed to produce products for the north of England, but it was never used for this purpose. The report concluded this failure contributed to the UK's need to import plasma from abroad. The findings list a number of other missed opportunities. From early 1983, decision-making in Scotland was said to be insufficient and too slow.
SMBTS recognises that there are many things that could and should have been done better in the past. We take responsibility for those. We apologise for those. And we will do everything in our power to make sure that such a tragedy does not unfold again.
In Tain, Robert Viana Ross reflects on his NHS treatment. Between the ages of 10 and 27, he was given 3 injections of factor VIII. He will never know which one was contaminated. In 1999, he was told he had hepatitis C.
I'm not looking for a witch hunt. I don't think that's going to benefit anybody. I lost my home, my savings, everything I'd put aside for the future all went. Bottom line is they have to pay, because I don't know how long I've got left.
On the stage during a service of reflection earlier were 1,000 glass bottles. Each contained a message from those affected by this scandal. Lives lost and futures shattered. Sharon Frew, STV News.
Today's report laid bare systemic, collective and individual failures. And in the past hour, the Prime Minister has offered victims an unconditional apology. Our Westminster correspondent Paris Gutouyanis was in Central Hall today with victims. Paris, what did they tell you?
Speaking to some of the victims, it's clear that what happened to them and their loved ones was so devastating, but that so much of the hurt and anger is actually about what happened next. The defensiveness and denial at the top of the NHS and at the top of government. Sir Brian Langstaff was clear this could and should have been avoided, but when they were confronted with evidence of their failures, officials were guilty of hiding the truth. In other words, a cover-up. A cover-up that over decades, ministers from the Conservatives and the Labour Party allowed to continue by failing to challenge consensus and not asking the right questions. Now, Rishi Sunak looked humbled faced with that, and victims told me the remarkable apology that the Prime Minister has just given is so overdue and so small compared to what they've suffered. But it finally confirms that all along, they were right and the officials were wrong.
Layer upon layer of hurt, endured across decades. This is an apology from the state to every single person impacted by this scandal. It did not have to be this way. It should never have been this way. And on behalf of this and every government stretching back to the 1970s, I am truly sorry.
And Paris, the next step is the issue of compensation. What are we expecting to be announced?
Well, it was agreed that today would be about the victims and the inquiry report. Tomorrow we'll get another government statement setting out the scope of a full compensation scheme. The cost is expected to run to more than £10 billion. And a big question will be, how fast can the government get that money out the door? Because as we've heard, so many victims have already died of their illnesses. More are dying every week. And normal party politics was suspended today. Tomorrow we'll hear some of those tough questions. Why has it taken so long to compensate victims? Why was an inquiry only called in 2017? Why have other countries managed to prosecute and even jail some of those responsible, but no one in the UK has been held personally accountable? And how do governments across the UK, including in Scotland, change the culture of the NHS, the civil service, and of politics to ensure these horrific failings never happen again?
OK, Paris at Westminster, thank you. Scotland is open for business. That's the message from the new Deputy First Minister and Economy Secretary Kate Forbes as she unveiled a £5 million package of support for start-ups today. But female entrepreneurs say they're still at a huge disadvantage, with just 2% of capital investment funding going to women-led businesses.
One female retailer has told STV News we're in a cost of business crisis and far better access to finance is needed to close the gender gap. Here's our political reporter Laura Alderman.
Antoinette recently took her sustainable fashion brand fully online, closing the doors of their shop in Edinburgh. She says soaring costs are leaving many businesses hanging by a thread.
The landlord was looking to double our rent and our footfall had dropped 54%, which obviously was very much related to the cost of living crisis, but we're also experiencing the cost of business crisis. As small businesses, we are really struggling and looking at going in survival mode, essentially. Female businesses need funded. And we have to stop talking about funding female businesses and actually start doing it. And it really is sad because females have got a harder time at start-up. They have 50% less cash usually at start-up than male counterparts.
And what's your favourite part of Scotland?
The Highlands captivate.
Today, a new £5 million package of support for startups was announced in Edinburgh, focused on bolstering female-led businesses.
Only 2p in every pound that is invested go to female founders. And so when we want to increase the number of businesses that are started in Scotland and which grow, then it stands to reason that we should focus on female startups. I met with some businesses that are working in waste and recycling, others that are working in decarbonisation, and others still that are working in farming and agriculture. So we want to ensure that businesses right across all industries have the opportunity to access funding and to grow and develop, because that's the future for Scotland.
But leading businesswomen say there remains an extreme gender imbalance.
1 in 5 startups are female-led, so that hasn't changed in at least 20 years. So it's a pretty, stubborn and persistent gap that we haven't managed to overcome. And it's not just in Scotland, this is a global challenge. So it's about finding ways at a more profound level to make change happen, rather than just finding 1 or 2 initiatives that might make a dent but are not sustainable and make a bigger difference in the long term.
I can't check real time.
Although any extra funding is welcomed, female entrepreneurs say so much more is needed to close the gender gap when it comes to business. Laura Alderman, STV News, Edinburgh.
Hundreds of college lecturers have walked out across the country due to a long-running pay dispute. Members of the EIS had again taken strike action after negotiations dating back to 2022 failed to reach a resolution. College employers are offering a £5,000 consolidated pay rise over 3 academic years. The union says meetings have not achieved tangible progress. A family from Renfrewshire who lost their 12-day-old son are demanding urgent testing for preeclampsia. The condition, which develops in the second half of pregnancy, is currently not tested for in Scotland, but is in other parts of the UK.
Amy and Stuart Geddes have launched Clark's campaign, which they hope will prevent others from going through the harrowing experience of losing a child. Vanessa Taff has more.
A small section of the Geddes family garden is dedicated to a boy with a huge place in their hearts. Clark was born prematurely 3 years ago. Amy, who is a type 1 diabetic, became extremely unwell with preeclampsia symptoms.
My blood pressure was climbing and Clark wasn't doing well. So they decided that to save my life, they had to take Clark out early. But he was just too little. We were really positive and we thought he's going to make it, but it just wasn't to be.
It wasn't known Amy had the condition. Her husband was braced for the worst when she had to deliver their son early.
The doctor said to me that there's ultimately a chance that they both might not come out of this. And it was a pretty sobering moment to think that I'm going to go for ultimately my happiest time in my life of welcoming in my second son to pretty much losing everything.
Preeclampsia can affect women during the second half of pregnancy or soon after their baby is born. The cause is unknown, but it's believed to occur when there's a problem with the placenta. It can be fatal for mothers and babies if it's not identified or managed correctly. In Scotland, more than an estimated 5,000 pregnancies present with suspected preeclampsia every year. Families and campaigners like the Geddeses want the NHS to offer a blood test, which is already available in other parts of the UK, to diagnose the condition.
It's a tool in the toolbox, and without that tool, clinicians are blind. Now, the result of that is harsh and very severe.
No parent should ever have to attend their own baby's funeral. And we firmly believe if there's any test available anywhere else in the UK, it has to be here in Scotland. Why are we missing out? Why are other families potentially going through the same traumatic, horrendous ordeal that we went through?
Shocking, absolutely shocking that that's allowed to happen in 2024. In 2024 we shouldn't be seeing babies die and mums getting seriously ill and die quite a lot of the time when they get severe cases. You know, we've got the testing and the means to do this, it should be done.
The Scottish Government say NHS boards have indicated that testing capacity and infrastructure pose challenges for implementation. While this family won't forget, they plan to fight to help and to save others. Vanessa Taff, STV News in Renfrewshire.
To other stories in the West, and a 37-year-old man has been convicted of a string of sexual and violent offences, including rape, across central Scotland. Christopher Harkins carried out the attacks between 2013 and 2019. He was found guilty by a jury at the High Court in Paisley and will be sentenced in July. Hundreds of workers at the Faslane and Coolport naval bases are being balloted for strike action in a dispute over pay. It comes after Unite members at Babcock Marine's nuclear deterrent submarine programme rejected a 3% pay increase. The ballot opens tomorrow and runs until the 11th of June. More than £1 million has been paid in fines to Glasgow City Council since the introduction of low emission zones. The measures were introduced in June last year to enhance the city's air quality. The council says some of the money will be redirected to community climate projects. Calls for better planning surrounding football fan gatherings are growing after disorder at the weekend was described as shameful and unacceptable. Police arrested 19 people as 25,000 people gathered in Glasgow to celebrate Celtic's title win, following the team's 3-2 victory against St Mirren on Saturday. 4 police officers were also injured in disorder at Glasgow Cross. Caitlin Hutchison reports.
It's become somewhat of a tradition in recent years. But with this weekend's unofficial title celebrations came damage, disruption and anti-social behaviour.
Huge crowds gathered here on Saturday, as many as 25,000 fans, some of whom were seen climbing bus stops, climbing traffic lights, setting off flares, and left the streets absolutely strewn with rubbish and with broken glass. There was a huge clean-up operation overnight by the council, but businesses in the area have told me that this is becoming a yearly headache and that more needs to be done about it.
Some local business owners had to shut up shop. Louise sent her staff home at 2 o'clock on Saturday, following advice from police.
It was beginning to kick off. There was a lot of people around about the street, flares starting to go off in the area. We just kind of got out there as quick as we possibly could. We are in full support of all events happening in Glasgow to bring people into the city, but it really needs to be a safe environment where people could take their families and their children to celebrate their team's successes.
4 police officers were injured during the disorder, and so far 19 people have been arrested. In 2021, thousands of Rangers supporters broke lockdown rules after winning their first top-flight title in 10 years. Those celebrations led to more than 50 arrests and more than £90,000 worth of damage.
We've seen it range from around £30,000 to £90,000 in the last 4 years to repair damage to statues in George Square or to repair damage to the Mercat Cross structure behind us there, which is 96 years old. And of course we've got the nearly 400 years old Tollbooth steeple there as well. I think we need to see more planning put in conjunction with the football clubs, with the City Council, the police and the fans clubs to make sure it's carried off much more successfully without the disruption that we've seen in recent years.
With the Scottish Cup final taking place next weekend at Hampden Park, the council says it's seeking ways to avoid disruption on the scale we've seen in recent years. Caitlin Hutchison, STV News in Glasgow.
Now here's Rahman.
Cheers, John. Good evening to you all. Scotland's Assistant Manager John Carver has told STV News Steve Clarke will name a provisional 28-man squad for the Euros on Wednesday, allowing players to prove their fitness before cutting the squad to 26 on June the 7th. Carver has confirmed Aaron Hickey will definitely miss the tournament due to injury. The Scots face Germany in the opening game of the tournament in less than a month's time.
the 28 who we name, obviously there's going to be 2 disappointed. And I think Steve's quite happy to, once we find out and finalise the 26, I think he'd rather sit face to face with these guys because they're an honest group, and we know that. It's a challenge. It'll be quite competitive because, like I say, we have to leave 2 players out, and that's never going to be easy.
Thomas Frank, the Brentford manager, has said that sadly for Aaron Hickey, it looks very bad for him.
He's not going to be fit. He's not going to be ready for us, but he's got a bright future ahead of him.
Now, after Celtic's title triumph, Brendan Rodgers has stressed the importance of his team having momentum going into this weekend's Scottish Cup final against Rangers, and says winning the Cup would be a fantastic way to end the season. Philippe Clement says he hopes players return from injury for the Hampden showpiece and insists his team will give it everything to win the final piece of silverware of the campaign. It's a familiar sight. Celtic players holding aloft the Premiership trophy. For the 12th time in 13 seasons, they have been crowned champions. On Saturday, Brendan Rodgers' side twice came from behind against St Mirren. With the league campaign over, all of the focus has turned to this weekend's Scottish Cup final.
We can draw a line under that. Players have delivered, and delivered under pressure. And in those circumstances, I give them a massive credit. But now we're getting to the Cup. Hampden's an amazing place, I believe, to go and play and show your football. So that will be then a fantastic way to end the season.
Rangers look like ending their league campaign with a win after Fabio Silva put them 3-1 up against Hearts. But the hosts responded with 2 late goals to earn a point. Philippe Clement will assess the fitness of his players to determine who may return for the Scottish Cup final.
If Leon Belligan can be fit again, I hope so. We're going to see this week what's going to happen. So in that way, it's for me difficult for the moment to plan this game, what will be your starting 11 or what changes you will make. I know my players are going to go full in this last game to give the fans something extra, something special. So that's why I believe in it.
Most of the Hearts squad will enjoy a break. But Zander Clark is hoping he's amongst a trio of Scots who are packing their bags for Germany and this summer's Euros.
It's the manager's decision, so I feel over the course of the season I've personally been probably done enough, but you never want to count the chickens before they've hatched, as they say, so we'll wait and see.
After Kilmarnock ended their season with a 1-1 draw away to Dundee, manager Derek McInnes says it will be special when the team plays in Europe next season. Elsewhere, relegated Livingston came back from a goal down to draw at home to Hibernian. And St Johnstone secured their top-flight status after defeating Motherwell 2-1. Ross County, who drew 2-2 with Aberdeen, finished second bottom and will face Raith Rovers in the Premiership playoff final. Premiership clubs will vote on a proposal to phase out artificial pitches in the top flight over the next 2 years. A resolution from the SPFL board will ban plastic surfaces in the Premiership in time for the 2026-27 season, if approved by a minimum of 9 clubs. Now, after Celtic's women's team won the SWPL title in dramatic fashion, head coach Elena Sadiku says she wants the Parkhead club to dominate the women's game in Scotland. On the final weekend of the season, Rangers were leading Partick Thistle, meaning Sadiku's team had to win against Hibernian, and Amy Gallagher netted the only goal of the game in the 90th minute to secure Celtic's first title.
This title came pretty fast, but we want to dominate domestic. We want to make sure that we do our job here in Scotland, and then we want to compete out in Europe. It's not gonna be overnight. We need to work hard for it, but this is just a good sign of that we're on the way.
Former Partick Thistle manager Jerry Collins has died at the age of 69.
OK, thanks, Rama. Now here's Sean with the weather.
A dry start to the day will become increasingly splashy. TUI sponsors STV Weather.
Very good evening to you. Got high pressure just about holding on just now. Over the last couple of weeks, warm air has been coming out of Germany. This week, though, Germany will be sending us an area of low pressure, which does mean it will be turning a lot more unsettled. I think the most unsettled day for us will be Wednesday. Widely, we'll see some heavy, thundery showers developing. But what a lovely evening we've got out there. We started off a little bit slow in central parts with that cloud. Most of it melted away. Now, plenty of sunshine into the evening. Overnight, clear spells. Temperatures down to about 12-13 degrees the west coast, but chillier central and eastern parts, especially as we head towards likes of Stirling, Falkirk, Grangemouth. Temperatures here could be down to about 5 or 6 degrees Celsius. Also the same as we head towards likes of Lanark, Moffat. Now into tomorrow morning, a dry start to the day with sunny spells. We'll see a little bit more cloud coming in from the east during the afternoon, and that will produce a few showers. Top temperatures once again for us in the west, we're into low 20s. We'll also see some showers developing across Ayrshire later on, northern parts of Stirlingshire and also Argyll and Bute. But 20 or 21 degrees Celsius, not quite as high as that 25 we had in Glasgow and Renfrewshire on Saturday, our warmest day of the year here so far this year. But temperatures coming down a little notch again on Wednesday, and that's the day when I expect we'll see heavy and thundery showers fairly widely. Hopefully by Thursday, most of the showers back onto the east coast, drier and brighter, but temperatures not quite as high. Bye-bye.
TUI sponsors STV Weather.
And that's all from us tonight. I'll be back with Scotland tonight at 10:40.
From all of us here, do enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night.
Good night.